Scary. Good. Welcome to Scary Stories NYC on Peter Bernard's Scary Good channel. This is the Best of Dogman 2019 episode. Before we get to the Dogman stories, I'd like to read some viewer mail. First, we got a letter from Mason Faraday. You might know him because he leaves a lot of comments in the comments section. He says, I'm not going to read all of his letter, I'm going to read part of it. He says, Dear Scary Stories, before I start, this isn't a prank, I swear it's all true. This one is about how the boogeyman became my waking nightmare. Now, it basically tells the story about how one of his friends on the bus was telling him about the boogeyman. He didn't believe him, so his friend dared him to say boogeyman 3 times while looking in the mirror. So he took the challenge and spoke the word boogeyman 3 times into the window he was sitting next to, since it was the closest reflective surface that he could see. That night when he went to sleep, he heard footsteps in his house, and he heard someone in his room, standing in the dark, telling him, shh. It wasn't his parents, because his parents wouldn't stand in the dark and tell him to be quiet. They would have come over to him and tucked him in and told him to be quiet. So because he was a kid, he just went to sleep anyway, thinking maybe it was a ghost and it was a good ghost. A few weeks later, he was in bed, and he was about to fall asleep when someone yelled, "Boo!" very casually, then proceeded to laugh in that same voice, knowing that it had scared the bejesus out of a kid. So Mason says he ran out of his bedroom screaming, and he'd like to say that was the end of the story, but the boogeyman came back. Mason thinks all this happened because of because he said boogeyman 3 times in a window, which wasn't even a mirror. So he says the boogeyman would haunt his dreams and sometimes visit him in person, although he never actually saw him physically. However, in his dreams, he took the form of the boogeyman from the real Ghostbusters. And I shouldn't laugh because that's still kind of scary. It's a cartoon, but it's scary. I mean, that's what this whole channel's about, scary cartoons, right? Mason has theories. He's got 2 theories about why the boogeyman appeared as the boogeyman from the real Ghostbusters. He thinks that A, it was already the boogeyman, and B, he knew that Mason loved the character, so he used the form in Mason's own imagination to terrorize him. Now, Mason insists that this couldn't have been a dream because once he had a dream that he found a picture of Boogeyman playing guitar. And when he woke up, he heard guitar playing somewhere inside his house at 2 o'clock in the morning. Mason says the boogeyman still visits him from time to time despite him being old enough to not believe. But that jerk always returns to remind him he's still there, even if you don't think he is. And so, our viewer Mason Faraday advises us all, never say the name boogeyman 3 times in a mirror or any reflective surface, or else folklore will come a-knocking for you. Got another letter from a guy who claims that his boss is a vampire, that he's very serious. Okay, I see. Actually, he says his friend's boss is a vampire. Okay. And the guy was always talking about his boss. She's really gorgeous. She had complete sway over this guy and she was his boss. He was the employee. Anything she wanted, no matter how outrageous it was, this guy was happy to do it for her. He knew that her control of him was unnatural and strange, and so he was kind of worried about it. He had no theory as to what it could have been because although he was very attracted to her, he'd been attracted to many women before and he'd never lost control like this, never been so easy to order around. He was not that type of a personality. In fact, if someone had told him that she was using infrasound on him, he would have probably considered that as a possibility. And to be honest, he never actually did rule out infrasound. So anyway, this guy supposedly was working harder and staying later and this woman's getting more and more work. Then one day she asks him to stay late to work with her in her office. He gets excited like it's a date. At one point she comes around supposedly behind his chair, leans over his shoulder to look at his computer. He shows her the stuff on the screen and she speaks softly in his ear. It's just business stuff, but he feels himself tingling all over and he realizes he's no longer understanding a word she's saying. When her teeth sunk into his neck, there was no pain, but there was extreme sensation. And that can often feel like essentially the same thing. The guy says his friend told him, imagine feeling the greatest thing ever and the most excruciating pain at the exact same time. He went home that night and there were red marks on his neck as though she had bitten him. He put band-aids on his neck and went to sleep, not sure if he wanted to go to work again in the morning. But when he got up in the morning, there was nothing wrong with his neck and he just had 2 band-aids on his pillow. Not wanting to make a big deal out of it, he went to work again and he claims that after work again that evening, she bit his neck and he doesn't remember how he got home. At this point, he wanted to see his friend's boss, so he snuck around outside the building that he knew his friend worked at and waited for them to leave. The guy says his friend looked terrible. He had rings under his eyes, his skin was pale. He kept telling the friend how wonderful and beautiful his boss was, but when the guy finally saw his friend's boss, she looked like she had to be 60 years old at least. The friend said she had red hair, but in actuality she had silvered white hair. She's still a very handsome woman, but she was not the red-haired beauty that the friend had been describing. The guy who sent us the letter says he was terrified of this woman at once because he knew she had to be a witch or something, so he didn't look her in the eye. He got out of the situation as fast as he could, and he tried to silence his thoughts until he was gone. He didn't want to get on her radar at all. So the guy says he's ashamed to say he lost touch quickly with that friend. He stopped returning his friend's texts and all that sort of thing. The reason he's writing us is because he just heard from a friend of a friend that this guy got lost while on vacation, supposedly with his boss. He hasn't been able to find out any more details yet, but he's starting to wonder if maybe the guy was right after all. Maybe his boss really is a vampire. And now for something completely scary.
I hear there's a celebrity with the initials GG appearing at the next Northeast Comic-Con.
Is it Gina Gershon?
What? No.
Is it Greg Grumberg?
Greg which?
Greta Garbo?
Here's that brain from space and the big giant lava lamp jar guy. Hey dude, how's it going? Well, I'd rather be on my home planet. Is that what your bumper sticker says on your car? Dude, if I had a car, that would mean I was free of this jar. If I was free of this jar, I would go back to my home planet. I'll take that as a no on the bumper sticker then. Our cranky friend here comes from a planet where nobody has a name. So recently we had a sort of a poll or a contest or something on YouTube to give you your own name. You gave me a name with a contest. So what did they all name me? Alien McAlien Face? Oh, no, but that's a really good one. Maybe we should go with that one, huh? I was joking. It's still good. It suits you. So what did the viewers suggest as my new slave name? We had some excellent suggestions here. I liked Hot Rod the Thought Wad. Well, it rhymes. Lobes is good. Yeah, Lobes is pretty badass, I must say. Then there's Al the Alien, IQ Brainsworth, Pestilence, Jorgen, Helen, Freddy, Sprain, I guess like Sprain the Brain, Captain Thinkmo, that's good, Jerry, Jarbrain, Uncle Flea, and so many more. So what do you say? Do you want to choose a name suggested by the viewers, or would you rather name yourself? I think I'm almost certain I know the name I would like, but why don't we give the viewers this one last chance to give suggestions in the comments? Maybe they can still sway my magnificent alien mind. If not, I think I can live with a certain one of these. Sounds good to me. You heard them, folks. If you would like, leave a comment with a name suggestion for our squishy storyteller here. Now, my friend, do you have a story for us? Why is it that 90% of the people who call you my friend are not your friend? Oh, I think you're exaggerating. Well, 87% then. Okay, 87%. But before you were just being ridiculous. Enough chit chat. I've got a scary story that needs to be told. It's a legendary story passed down from generation to generation in one particular, very private family living in a small town in upstate New York. The only reason I know this story is that when I first landed here on Earth, I sucked out the minds of 20 or 30 young people in order to orient myself, and one of them happened to be a descendant of the family in question. They are a somewhat wealthy family, although less now than in generations past. The family mansion is still maintained by several of the elders, but most of the younger generation has moved out and earns livings on their own based on their particular skills and abilities. Now, I cannot say that I consider this story true, since it's a story about werewolves, and we all know werewolves aren't real, right? Werewolf in the subway. This is the story about great-great-granduncle Cyrus, not his real name, the last in this family's line of werewolves. I say last in line because, according to family legend, the family stole the land of a poor witch and she cursed them to 6 generations of woe. Not woe as in whoa, dude, but the bad kind of woe, W-O-E. After that, a succession of 6 sons in the family were born on Friday the 13th, and each of them became afflicted with the werewolf curse upon his 13th birthday. Now, Uncle Cyrus and his wife had a son born on some other date, and the werewolf curse was thus broken. But it did not relieve poor Cyrus of the curse himself. Uncle Cyrus was usually only afflicted by this on the full moon, and on most full moons the worst it amounted to was a kind of fever or sickness. It did become something much closer to the classic werewolf transformation on some full moons though, and so he took to locking himself in and barricading the doors against his own exit. Sometimes on the full moon he would wake up in the morning to find his room in quite a mess, but he had never succeeded in getting out, since his memories of the transformations were entirely absent. He could only guess as to what had happened to him that caused him to behave so destructively. In spite of all this, Uncle Cyrus was able to hold down a respectable job as a professor at Wagner College in Staten Island. He moved to the island with his family, but then a strange series of events unfurled that led to the disappearance from history of Uncle Cyrus. It seems that 1 month, the symptoms leading to the full moon illness were particularly harsh, and Uncle sent his wife and son away to the family home in upstate New York. He intended to lock himself up and prevent himself from harming anyone, as he had felt far more affected by the moon that month than usual, which is why his servants were quite surprised to witness Uncle Cyrus on the night of the full moon unlocking himself and exiting his premises. He had told them he would be locked in all night, and now he was doing the opposite. There are no more references to Uncle Cyrus in history at all. Not in official history, at least. We don't know how Cyrus got to Manhattan, but we know that he did because the police contacted the family to come pick up his body. Uncle Cyrus died in the New York City subway system in Harlem, shot down on the tracks by the New York City police, who swore they were shooting at a, quote, wolf wearing pants, unquote. They claimed that upon the creature's demise, he transformed into a man right in front of their eyes. Why had Uncle Cyrus left the safety of Staten Island? Why did he seem to be traveling north? Where was he trying to go? What was he trying to do? Because he died that night, we can never know the answer. According to the officers, the monster had first been seen in the 110th Street station, then ran northward and eventually met his demise on the tracks just south of the 125th Street station. One officer said it was like if you had a man running along, but from the waist up, they sewed a huge wolf's front end on. Like a wolf sticking out of a man's pants. When running through dark tunnels, the officers claimed they could see the creature's eyes shine even without the use of their flashlights. There was a general acceptance that what they were chasing was unnatural, and there was a lot of praying going on in that subway on that day. It didn't take a silver bullet to fell the beast though, and I'm not sure that superstition had even been thought up yet by then. But New York's finest won out over the poor cursed creature. Now when they found his ID in his pocket and realized that Cyrus belonged to an important family, the entire thing was hushed up and kept out of the newspapers. But within the family, the truth was always known, that Uncle Cyrus was the werewolf in the subway. The forest on the top of the wall, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Recently, I read an article online about what they call the embankment, which is this really weird feature to one of the neighborhoods in Jersey City. If you walk around that part of town, you'll notice entire overgrown forests way up over your head, on top of these massive walls. Don't worry, I'm not going to tell you giants built them. They actually were originally supports for a freight rail system. There's a movement to reconnect them and turn them into a park in the sky like the High Line in Manhattan. I think that's a great idea, but when I was a kid, I would have been terrified of it. You see, back then, I lived in a building directly across a narrow alleyway from one of the parts of the embankment. My window was situated so I could look directly into the jungle up there. I saw birds, I saw squirrels, I saw other kinds of rodents, but on a few occasions, I could have sworn I saw something else, something I literally couldn't explain. I remember the first time I started to think something odd was going on up on the forest on top of the wall. I didn't personally see anything that time. It was a friend of mine who was visiting. He looked out the window and just casually told me there was a kid over there on top of the wall. I looked and I saw something darting back into the bushes, but I couldn't make out what it was. I asked my friend if he was joking, but he casually said no, he had just seen a kid, and then he changed the subject. I told him I didn't know of any way to get up there, so I didn't know how a kid could possibly be there unless he could fly. My friend said he must have climbed and didn't seem to think the conversation was interesting enough to continue. I kept wondering if he was pulling my leg, but after that, I watched the woods in the air outside my window a little more carefully than I had before. I didn't see anything strange. That is, until one night, when I gazed out at the woods and I was convinced I saw eye shine. Something with binocular vision was looking right back at my window. It could have been an owl, maybe, or some kind of raptor. Maybe it was a dog. It had to be something with forward-facing eyes, and that usually means a predator. If you're hunting your dinner, it helps to have both eyes facing front, so you can see it in 3D as you chase it. I was a nerd about animals back then, so that's where my mind went. I watched the creature for over an hour, and it never seemed to move. So I got out my father's big flashlight and shined it across the alley into the trees. At that distance, it didn't light things up as much as I had hoped, but it did scare whatever it was off. I still don't know what it was, but it was too big to be a squirrel. Then there was the time that I heard something out of my window. It must have been a weekend or a holiday, because I was sitting in my room during the day. I remember the leaves were mostly turning yellow and orange, so I'm guessing it was sometime between September and November. Almost none of the leaves had fallen yet, but they were all different colors, and the sound I was hearing was that of leaves and branches being shaken across the alley. I looked, and I swore I could see some trees off in the distance shaking violently. I wondered what could be causing it. Was it two animals having a fight, maybe? Then I noticed that the shaking trees were progressing slowly in my direction. Maybe I would get to see what was doing it. This had to be a big animal, judging by how roughly the trees were being shaken around as it moved through them. Then, just before reaching the edge closest to me, everything calmed down. It happened very quickly. It had come over close to me, and now everything was still. Was it sitting inside the trees watching me again? I stared out my window, but I couldn't see anything. I got that creepy feeling like I was being watched, though, and so I went into the living room further into the apartment, away from whatever was outside my window. The first time I actually saw something myself other than eye shine was also the first time I brought a girl into my room. My mother told us we could go hang out because she knew the girl and thought she could trust her to make me keep my hands to myself. The girl wanted to see the forest on top of the wall, so she made a beeline for my bedroom window. As we both looked on in amazement, we saw a face staring back at us. It was very low to the ground. It was set back in the shade of the trees, but it was definitely a face. I could see both eyes, and I could see teeth and a mouth. We both gasped as we acknowledged we were both seeing the same thing. My heart was going a million miles an hour. Then, something really amazing happened. Something I had been waiting years for. The creature's eyes and mouth seemed to rise up off the ground. Higher and higher up they rose, and then we could see a body. A hairy body. It was humanoid, but it was not human. It looked like a skinny bear standing there, but the paws were more like hands than bear paws. It turned around to re-enter the woods, and for a half second, we saw it in profile. She shouted, "Bear!" while at the same second I shouted, "Dog!" A second later, it was gone. We discussed it at length that day, and in fact, it became the main thing we ever talked about since we didn't actually date for very long. She thought it was a bear because bears can stand up and walk around if they choose to. I thought it was a dog or a wolf or a coyote because that's what it looked like, a dark-furred, upright walking wolf. She agreed that it did seem to look more like a canine than a bear, but she pointed out that wolves don't walk on their hind legs, so it had to be a bear. The thing is, a bear could not possibly survive on top of a wall in downtown Jersey City. Granted, it was much wilder then when I was a kid than it is today, but there were still no bears living there. Of course, there were no wolves either, I guess. I mean, I never saw any large animals up there again, and what I did see, I saw very quickly. Maybe it was a person in a costume, although that seems as unlikely to me as a bear or a walking dog, to be honest. A human would have to scale the outer wall to get up there, but how would an animal get up there then? I wondered if somehow there were some way things got up there from within the center of the wall. Maybe there was a way to go from the top down to the sewers from within the center of the structure. I wondered how long it had been left untouched by man. Probably 60 years since someone had been up there when I was a kid. Nature might have made wholesale changes to the parts of it that we couldn't see from our angle. I'm anxious to hear more about the efforts to turn the embankment into a park, but if and when work ever actually begins on the project, I'm even more anxious to hear about what they discover once they start sending people into the forest on the top of the wall. We've got Colleen Great and Patricia Howdigi from Those American Girls guest starring as the scary girl voices haunting PQ River as Dr. Death in a very strange kind of Dogman story. But first, I'd like to tell you a story we received just yesterday that allegedly took place during this week's Wolf Moon, also known as the Blood Moon and the Supermoon. I knew it was incredibly bright here in New York and hard to get in focus in photographs. The person who sent me this story was out in the cold with a group of friends having a lunar eclipse party when he encountered what he and his friends interpreted as a loup-garou, or a werewolf. You see, this event supposedly took place near New Orleans, and we call it the Wolf Moon Werewolf, as told to Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, I live in New Orleans, and down here we call the Dogman the loup-garou or rougarou, which basically means werewolf in French slang. This is the story of how my friends and I set out to see the lunar eclipse, but ending up seeing a rougarou instead. First of all, did you see that story that was in the papers online about how something slammed into the moon during the lunar eclipse and made a flash in the dark part of the moon? Well, if you didn't, it really was in the papers. You can Google it. That's important. Remember that part because I'll kind of get back to it. Okay, so there were a bunch of my friends who wanted to go out in the snow and have a party to watch the lunar eclipse. I didn't really want to be there. It sounded dumb to me. But my buddies talked this girl into going that they knew I liked, and suddenly I was part of the dumbest party in history. I guess the only three people besides me that really matter in this particular story are my idiot macho friend. Let's call him Hans Hansenfranz. He's not German or anything, but he's macho like those two old muscle guys from TV when I was a kid. Then there's the girl I like, who we can call Diana, because I'm still Diana, date her. And there was also this nerd girl there that I don't really know all that well. She's sort of a friend of a friend. Let's call her Nerdina. I think there were 7 or 8 other people besides us 4, and everyone mingled through the entire thing. We couldn't see much up in the sky for a while, and I was getting kind of bored and cold. I wanted to play frisbee with some others to warm myself up, but Diana didn't want to. She wanted to drink, so that's what I did too. Hans was talking to a crowd of 3 young women who seemed fascinated by anything he said, and there were some other guys being ignored who all stared jealously at the women Hans was entertaining. I realized I was lucky to have a woman to entertain myself, and then I realized Diana wasn't listening to a word I was saying. She was looking past me, or at least it seemed that way to me. When she laughed at one of Hans's dumb jokes, I had confirmation. So now the dumbest guy on the scene had literally all the women in the party in his thrall. Well, all the women except Nerdina, who had brought her own telescope with her. She had it mounted on a tripod, and she was staring heavenward, blissfully unaware of the tribal mating rituals being played out all around her. I decided that getting a close-up look at the eclipse might be less humiliating than being ignored by this girl I liked, so I strolled over and struck up a conversation with Nerdina. She wasn't really all that friendly. That's a thing about nerds. I mean, real nerds, not the Instagram models who put on prop glasses and call themselves #nerdy. Real nerds are shy and lonely and have few or no friends, yet if you act friendly toward them, they're instantly condescending and hurtful toward you. Like comic book guy from The Simpsons, you know? Worst comparison ever. But you know what I mean. So I got ignored by the one girl, and now the nerd girl is making fun of me. So I cut her off and I asked her, can I just look at the eclipse for a second? She said yeah, because she wanted to go get a drink, and she said she'd be right back. Okay, so I looked through the telescope, and yeah, there's the moon, and it's got a shadow on it, big deal. I started moving the telescope around, looking in the trees to see if I could see a deer or an owl or something cool. I stopped suddenly when I thought I saw eye shine. It took me a while to get back to the spot a second time, but it was definitely this sort of yellow-orange eye shine. Immediately, I did what any other red-blooded American male would do. I ran over to Diana, and I told her I found an animal on the telescope. I figured it would be a way to peel her away from Hans and his other groupies. No such luck. She ran straight to Hans and asked him if he wanted to look at the animal on the telescope with her. She brought the one big animal over to look at the other animals. She totally stole my move. Thoroughly outclassed, I moped along by myself, and Nerdina was suddenly there. She was yelling at me about letting everyone move her telescope around. Now she was going to have to readjust it to see the eclipse again, blah blah blah. While she was talking, suddenly 2 of the girls screamed, and they all seemed to be staring into the bushes where I had seen the eye shine. I jogged over to find out what was going on, and Nerdina shooed everyone away from her telescope so she could point it back at the moon. I asked around about what was going on, and I was told that Hans claimed he saw a rougarou in the trees. We were all standing in front of the telescope now, closer to the woods. I rolled my eyes. Rougarou. Hans saw a werewolf. Sure he did. What was he going to do next to impress the ladies? Pull out a gun and shoot as my brain thought this, my eyes actually saw Hans pull a gun out of his pants and point it toward the woods. He actually did it. He actually brought a gun to a lunar eclipse party. Now he was shouting something at the trees, daring whatever it was to come out and show itself. He thought there was a man-eating monster in the trees, and his answer was to ask it to come out. Gee, no wonder all the women were so impressed with him. So the next thing that happened was so utterly unexpected, I wasn't the only one whose knees buckled. In response to being ordered out of the woods, a rougarou, an actual wolf creature that walks on its hind legs, an actual werewolf, walked out of that wood line. It looked like he was insane, like he was furiously angry and hungry too. I never saw such rage in a dog's eyes, and I never saw a dog stand there like a man. He stood like some kind of character from the movies. He was bigger than any man. He was more ferocious than any dog too, and he growled to make sure we knew it. I fell to my butt, and I saw some of the others do the same, both men and women. It was like your legs fainted, sort of. Almost like a mass fainting. It's one thing for someone to claim there's a dogman in the woods. It's another thing entirely for it to walk out in front of a bunch of people and growl at all of you. So basically, the only two people who weren't either running away or sitting on their butt in shock were Nerdina, who was back staring at the moon through her lens, and Hans, who fired a shot right at the Dogman, who disappeared. I will repeat that. The Dogman was no longer there once the shot was fired. I do not mean that it ran away quickly, or that it flew away, or that it fell through a trap door and was replaced by Penn and Teller. I mean it was there, growling, and then it wasn't there at all. Nerdina called out to us, "Hey, I just saw a bright flash on the moon." I told her it wasn't on the moon, it was the flash from Hans's firing. She insisted no, it was a flash on the moon, not on the Earth. Hans said that the flash was where the Rougarou teleported to, and of course all the girls laughed. Well, come to think of it, funny or not, that's a better theory for what happened than any of mine.
Dogman and Disembodied Voice Encounter, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ Ribber. I've been reading about Dogman online recently because I want to understand an encounter I had. I think I met this cryptid face to face, but this story is so strange and so different from other Dogman stories I hear online that maybe what I saw was something else. Maybe someone hearing this story will know better than I did what happened to me. All I know for certain is that when the weird phenomena all started, it was as far away from a Dogman encounter as possible. It seemed at first I was being haunted. Let me start at the beginning so that this makes more sense. A little while back, the company I worked for decided to relocate my whole department, which meant a promotion and a raise for me, but also meant I'd have to find a new home. I wanted a place that reflected my new, better position at the company, but I really didn't have the savings to get that kind of a house yet. I ended up finding a small but stately little 2-story, 2-bedroom, old-fashioned shingled house a bit out of town at the edge of a forest. It's basically inside the forest, really, and there are no other houses on the block. I was surprised to find it for rent at such a price. No lease, just pay month to month. That was great for me, because I hope to be able to afford something closer to town in half a year or so. Even though it was in such a rural location, the little house had an ornate chandelier downstairs, a fireplace, and a beautiful staircase leading up to the bedrooms. Each of the bedrooms had fireplaces too, but they looked as though they had been sealed up years earlier. There was central heating. The place had been kept up well, yet still looked old. Everything seemed original if it wasn't actually. It was not what you would expect to find out here, so I guessed it might have been a vacation home for a rich person when it was first built. All the windows on each floor had a lovely view. The woods and the mountains past them mesmerized me day or night. I never went out in them, though. I was too busy, really. This was just supposed to be a place for me to sleep in the short term. Then one night, I was laying in bed, and I heard a voice.
I can see you.
I sat up. Had I really heard that? It sounded like a girl or a woman. I looked around and I saw nobody. Was that a hypnagogic or hypnopompic audio hallucination? It didn't sound as though it were right in my ear. It sounded like it was at the foot of my bed, to the right. I turned on the light next to the bed and got up to investigate the room. Since I found nothing, I figured it was in my head. Getting back into bed, I heard,
I can see you.
It was coming from the window. I raced over and looked out. Of course, it was the second-story window. There was nothing out there but air. I pulled it open and leaned out, looking down and up to see if anyone could possibly have been there, but saw nothing. I wasn't able to get much sleep, that night or the next few nights either. At least once during the night, always at different times and always sounding like it was coming from different places. I would hear that voice.
I can see you.
Always saying the same thing. My boss pulled me into his office at work. It had become obvious I wasn't getting enough sleep. He was nice to me about it, but I could tell that behind his concern lurked impatience, and that I was messing up my promotion. I couldn't tell him that I was losing sleep because I was being haunted by an invisible peeping Thomasina. I made up some excuse and told him I'd get it taken care of. That day, at lunch, I started looking for a different place to live. I contemplated asking one of my buddies at work if I could stay over for a night, but they're both married, and I knew it would be imposing. Plus, I couldn't think of any good reasons why I would need to be there besides, my house is haunted. On the drive home, I thought about getting sleeping pills, but didn't. It would be better if I could lick this naturally. I decided to try sleeping on the couch downstairs just to vary the routine. Maybe the ghost only haunted the second floor. No such luck. Just as I was falling asleep, I heard it again.
I can see you.
It was definitely from outside. This time I was prepared. I went to sleep with my jeans on. I slipped on my boots and coat and ran out the door around to the spot where I had heard the voice emanating from. There was some old snow around there, but there were no footprints in it. I tried stepping lightly on the snow to see if it was icy or soft, and I easily made a print there with my boot. If someone had been there, they would have left prints too. As I was processing this information, I heard, off in the distance, to my left.
I can see you.
Running, I tried to reach the location of the voice as fast as I could. It was in the forest past some trees. I ran for a while, then realized I was probably there, even past the point where it had happened. I still saw nothing. To my right,
I can see you.
Again, I ran after the voice. That girl and I were going to reach some closure tonight, no matter what I had to do. My job and my sanity were at stake, so I had to reach her.
I can see you.
To the left, back I ran, retracing steps, then
I can see you.
forward, and to my right. On and on this went, until I realized I had absolutely no idea where I was in this forest, and I was getting pretty tired from the effort. When I reached this next location, if she wasn't there, I was going to have to give up and try to find my way home. Seeing nobody at all, I stopped running and bent down to catch my breath. Then, from just the other side of the large bush in front of me, I heard,
I can smell you.
Well, that was different. Forgetting how tired I felt a second earlier, I tore around the bush with all the speed I could manage, slicing my hands and cheek on some thorns in the process. I got to the other side and found nothing. Once again, nothing. I would have felt crazy if I weren't so annoyed. That's when something touched me on my back and I heard,
I can touch you.
Turning around, I saw no little girl. I saw no adult woman either. What I saw did not look like a girl or a ghost or even a human. What I saw was a monster. It had a long snout and it had pointed ears, but other than that, it did not match the normal description of a dogman. I'd say its snout was more rat-like than dog-like, but that might be because it constantly was twitching in a way that reminded me of a rodent. The teeth were more like a large canine or even feline, not like a rat or hare. Its eyes looked insane. It looked diseased. Parts of it looked like they were bubbling, as though it were having trouble maintaining its form, or maybe like something was crawling under its skin. Whatever it was, it screamed at me. Its hot, rotting breath searing my skin and turning my stomach. I ran. I ran and I ran. I had only seen it for a couple seconds. I had only seen it from the chest up, really. I ran till I was out of breath and then ran some more because I never wanted to see it again. I could hear the laughter of a girl as though it were echoing from all around me at once. Maybe it was more than one girl. Maybe it was an army of invisible girls. My heart was beating so hard I was convinced I was going to have an attack. And then I saw it. My car, the house, but mostly my car. I ran in the house, grabbed my clothes for tomorrow, my car keys, then drove off into the night. I Googled for a hotel on my phone, and that night I had my first decent sleep in weeks. So what exactly happened to me? Who or what was making that girl voice? Why would it be working with that Dogman creature? Was the Dogman creature itself something projecting that voice? I never saw it actually speak, and I couldn't imagine that rat snout forming words so delicately. Did I encounter one entity or two? Could it have been a shapeshifter, like a shaman or evil wizard from a native culture? Or was it just what it looked like? Some kind of monster dog rat thing? I've read some stuff about infrasound being able to cause hallucinations. Could the creature have been emitting low-frequency sound, and could my own mind have provided the details of what I heard? Or could the creature itself have been an illusion brought on by low-frequency infrasound? My only wounds from the event were inflicted by that unholy bush, so I don't have direct evidence proving that I encountered any physical being. And so, that's why I've been reading about Dogman a lot lately. Is that what I encountered? And if not, does anyone have any idea what this might have been? All I know is, the next time I hear a disembodied voice, I will not, in any way, investigate it.
This episode, we've got an all-new story sent to us back in December by a gentleman who would prefer to remain anonymous. It's a story about how he thought he had come upon a member of my species, but what he saw had a dog-shaped head. Do I have a dog-shaped head? No, so how could the thing outside his tent, the thing staring at him, the dog-headed thing that wouldn't go away, how could it possibly have been a Bigfoot? But if it wasn't me, then who was it? And what did they want? Let's find out in an all-new story called Dog-Headed Bipedal Bluff Creek Monster, as told to Peter Bernard, read by your old pal Bigfoot. I recently had the grim task of burying my wife and best friend. It was a difficult time made easier by close friends and relatives. In the weekend after her death, some old friends stayed over with me, and we talked a lot about the old days. One of the stories that none of us had thought about in years was brought up by my daughter, and the memories came flooding back. It was the story of the strangest and most frightening thing that had ever happened to my wife and myself. Only this time, when I remembered back, I wondered out loud if what had happened to us was actually an encounter with some sort of werewolf or Dogman. To go back to the beginning of this story means traveling all the way back to the mid or late 1970s, so hold on to your hats because here we go. I think it was 1977 when this took place, because I'm certain it was not the bicentennial year of 1976 when we summered in Philadelphia to get the whole 1776 experience. And I know it wasn't 1979 because that was the summer my mom died and we were caught up in dealing with all that went with that. So it must have been 1977 or 78 when my wife asked me if I wanted to camp out across the southern USA all summer. This was the kind of thing we would do back then before we had kids. We would go away for a month or two and see the world. I didn't like the idea of us traveling through the South though, because we were still kind of hippies and I had seen Easy Rider. Somehow we compromised and went camping in Northern California. I don't remember if we knew at the time that this was a place people saw Bigfoot a lot, but I remember joking around that we were going to see Sasquatch before the summer was over. I think I just did it to tease my wife though. Then came a night where those jokes stopped seeming funny in the slightest, and we thought we were under attack from that very creature. There are reasons why I no longer think that was Bigfoot menacing us that night. There are reasons why I now think maybe it was a Dogman. And I'll get to all that. But first, let me explain the situation it occurred in. Okay, now I'm gonna be completely honest. I know we did camp out around Bluff Creek. I know this for a fact. What I don't remember 100% is if this took place at Bluff Creek or nearby or exactly where. Remember, this was around 2 months of walking around and camping. I do remember one night being allowed to sleep on the Yurok Reservation, which we considered an honor, and I remember visiting with another camper we met who lived on the Hoopa Valley Reservation, which is further south. I know we were in Six Rivers National Forest because they allowed fishing in there, and we subsisted part of the summer on fish. That became kind of a job for a while. Fish enough to subsist, camp out, tell ghost stories, pretend Bigfoot was in the woods around us, then do it all again until the weather started getting cold, and we'd have to go find jobs and an apartment again. We were free spirits, and it was a different time. I am glad neither of our children ever did anything like this. It would have stressed me out to no end if they got lost out in nature. I used to complain that my parents were too controlling, but they let me do a lot more things than I would have probably been comfortable letting my own kids do. Sometimes my wife and I would wander near a town and we would go in and get some supplies. My one extravagance was that I had a battery-operated radio that also tuned in TV channels. Just the audio, obviously. I know what you're asking. What was the point of tuning in only the audio of a TV station? Well, if you lived in the 70s, it would have made sense to you as well. Being out in the wilderness and able to barely tune in the audio from some local TV station who knows where out there, that was fascinating and exciting. Plus, it helped us feel like we were still connected to human civilization and still here on planet Earth, you know? We would go off trail with our compass and paper maps and sometimes not see other human beings for over a day. We got to feeling a bit like we were entirely in our own world, like we were moon explorers. This was a dangerous feeling to have. It makes you feel safe and complacent. People who feel safe are people who let their guards down, and people who let their guards down are people who make mistakes. Mistakes can get you killed if you're out in the middle of nowhere. This is almost what happened to us. We were camping off trail in a forest one night. We had gotten too tired to travel before we had found a good place to camp in, really, so we had our tent set up between some trees in a fairly dense part of the forest. It was too tightly packed with trees to risk making a fire, and the rain was coming soon anyway, so we huddled in our tent eating nuts and dried berries we had bought in some town, and using our body heat to keep each other warm. We had camped in clearings in forests before, but never tight packed in with a bunch of trees and brush. It had a certain weird fairy tale quality to it, I have to admit. When we first settled in, we were in high spirits. Our plan was to eat our fill, then try to sleep through the oncoming storm. The food gave us a bit of energy though, so I pulled out my TV radio and tuned around, trying to find a show to listen to in spite of the storm. Again, you just have to trust me that we found this entertaining. We found a show. I don't know what it was because I couldn't see it, but it was something like Lassie. Maybe it was Old Yeller or some other Disney movie, but it was either a TV show or a movie about a dog. There was exciting music so you could tell that an action scene was happening, and there was a dog growling and barking. There was something else in the scene as well, something larger than the dog. Maybe the canine was defending humans from a bear or a mountain lion, I was guessing. I got lost in the audio, trying to imagine what was happening in the visuals. It's kind of a Zen thing to do, and I was very deep in a Zen-like state, fully immersed in the TV dog drama. My wife asked me if I had heard a dog barking, and I laughed. She had a weird sense of humor. Then she asked me again, and I looked at her to see if she was all right. She seemed very stressed, and didn't look as though she were joking around at all. I told her that of course I could hear barking because we were listening to a show about a dog. She turned the radio off and held her finger to her lips, signaling that I should shut up and listen. So I did, and I heard nothing. Crickets, that's all. I heard crickets, and I told her so. She shushed me. She was certain something was out there in the darkness. I never saw her look so worried before. She looked like she was afraid for her life. I wanted to reassure her, but she was too frightened to let me even speak. So we listened. We just sat there and we listened. The forest was quiet other than the insects chirping in every direction. All I could hear was the night and our breathing. Then, all at once, I heard it. Thunder off in the distance, followed soon by the intense rain beating down on the tent, drowning out all other noise or sound. I settled in to try to get some sleep while my wife stayed up, wasting her energy, in my opinion, on fretting. While I lay there with my eyes closed, the sound of the storm got louder and louder. The rain beat down like a million men playing tom-toms, and the thunder grew louder each time, with the light and the sound getting closer each time as well. My wife was stressed to the point where I thought I could hear her crying to herself in the dark, and it was making it impossible for me to sleep. I sat up and suggested to her that she try to get some rest, but in the middle of my sentence, lightning struck outside close enough to light up the entire side of our tent to my right and my wife's left. Instinctively, we both looked in the direction of the light, and in that second of time, we both saw the same exact thing. Within the bright flash of light, we saw the dark silhouette of a very, very tall humanoid figure standing there. Somewhere between that lightning and our tent was a very, very large man, and it looked as though he had horns on his head. My wife was sobbing uncontrollably. She was now gone. I couldn't talk to her anymore, or at least she couldn't hear me. This got me really angry, and I stuck my head out of that tent, shouting at whoever it was that they had better get out of there. And then I saw who it was, or what it was. Now, you have to realize it was very dark, and the only illumination was the light from the occasional lightning, which was relatively far away during that particular moment. I don't know what I was expecting to see out there, but I know it wasn't this. The horns on his head were not horns. They moved around. They were maybe ears, but wolf-like ears on top of his head. I say he because it seemed like a very muscular man, but the legs were all twisted around and looked deformed. I know they weren't deformed. They were supposed to be that way, though, because he was symmetrical, and he moved gracefully on the legs. I would say this man was tall, and even though he sort of hunched forward like a tyrannosaur, he stood over 6 feet. I myself never grew to be more than 5 or 10, so you can imagine I found this person to be a threat, standing there the way he was. I stopped yelling and just observed, utterly confused as to what I was looking at. The man turned to look directly in my eyes, and what I saw looking back at me was not a man at all. The eyes were not human eyes, for one thing. It was covered in longish, wet hair, but long all over its body, not just on its head. Its face was the strangest part. It did look something like a dog, but that was not a dog face looking at me. It wasn't a wolf face either, but it wasn't human. As I stared, the creature barked at me like a giant dog. I retreated into the tent and zipped it up as though the zipper was going to protect me from an apex predator. My wife was coherent enough at that point to ask me what I had seen, so I told her the only thing that my 1977 mind could think of that it could possibly have been. I told her it was Bigfoot. The storm soon passed, but that so-called Bigfoot stuck around. After the rain, I could literally hear him walking around in the mud. I whispered to my wife that maybe we could make casts of its tracks in the morning, and she slapped my face hard before I could finish the sentence. She informed me that if we survived to the morning, we would be getting out of that forest and finding a hotel room so she could call her parents and tell them she was coming home. Of course, she was right. We were enduring a traumatic episode, and we still didn't know if we were going to survive it. Our priority was to stay alive, and then to cope with the stress that would come post-trauma. My wife had an understanding of how things work, while I was always the one lost in theories about things like whether we can prove Bigfoot exists. I mean, yes, that is important, but in a moment where you and your best friend might be about to meet your maker, it somehow loses much of its value. I would love to tell you that I charged out of the tent Rambo style and dealt with that monster so that my wife would be safe again, but Rambo didn't come out till the 80s, and this was 1977. Or 78, like I said, I'm not sure exactly. So, what really happened was we both sat there, and we both held each other, and we both listened as the thing out there would walk further away, then close by, further away, close by, and when it was close, it would sniff the tent all over. I don't know what we smelled like, but it smelled like a wet dog, as you can imagine. We were both crying all through it. The creature wasn't leaving. It was just waiting. I figured it was because it knew that sooner or later we were going to have to come out of that tent. And when that happened, it could strike. And when it struck, we were going to be goners. My mind raced back and forth between ridiculous plans for how we might be able to evade the monster while running through the forest, to thoughts that I would never see my family and friends again. The sorrow was overwhelming, as was the desperation in my bad plans for escape. I tried to suggest some of them to my wife and she just shushed me. She didn't even want to hear them. She understood that we were at the creature's mercy and there was nothing we could do. I, on the other hand, who had actually looked in that thing's eyes, I somehow still thought we could defeat it. I had witnessed proof that we are not on top of the food chain, but I was unable to accept this, and I was lost in denial. My wife literally said to me, "We are no longer on top of the food chain." I remember that specifically. That was the moment my world came crashing down around me. From that point on, neither of us ever expected safety or sanity from life ever again. That was the exact moment that we both became fatalists, understanding down to the very core of ourselves that nothing in life is guaranteed, nothing in life is owed to you, and nothing in life is ever going to be safe. It was a hard realization, but one that served us well for decades. So, obviously we both survived that night. I'd like to tell you a grand story about how we managed to pull it off, but the simple truth is that we cried ourselves to sleep and woke up to sunlight and birds singing and no giant mythological carnivore anywhere the eye could see. As we packed up, I simultaneously was looking for footprints. I saw nothing that looked like the Bigfoot tracks I had seen on TV. I did see a lot of tracks that looked like maybe cat tracks? Big cat tracks. So I figured that there had also been a mountain lion outside our tent with us in addition to the Bigfoot with the weird long face. My wife never saw the monster, and I had told her it was a Bigfoot. So she would tell the story of the night we were camping and got interrupted by a Bigfoot in a thunderstorm. She would tell it as the story of the scariest moment in our lives. It was the moment she decided she wanted to have children if she survived the ordeal. So you might say that the monster was partially responsible for the little family we rose over the next 2 decades. And always, when talking about the story, we both referred to the monster as Bigfoot. I think the last time we ever told that story was maybe in the 1990s. After the kids grew, it just never came up again. But when my wife died, memories flooded back, and several people asked that I tell the story, the way my wife always used to tell it. When I got to the part about what I actually saw, though, chills went through my entire body as it dawned on me. Maybe the legs on that so-called Bigfoot weren't twisted around. Maybe those were dog legs. Maybe those big cat tracks outside our tent weren't cat tracks at all. Maybe they were the tracks of the monster I had mistaken for Bigfoot. Maybe what my wife and I actually saw that rain-soaked California night in the 70s was, in fact, Dogman. So, did you decide on a name yet? No. Oh, gee. Well, but I promise I will give my decision in the next video I appear in. I just want to give people time until then to suggest and vote if they want to. But I'll give my answer within the first minute of my next appearance, I promise. Alright, but I'm holding you to that promise, as I expect you to. Okay, well, we'll be back next episode or the episode after or something, and this guy here will have a new name suggested by one of you. See you then. Ciao.
Come back from more scary stories.